The estate lawyer's name was Ferris, and he had the specific manner of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that he'd stopped being able to distinguish it from good news. He slid the deed across the desk with the same expression he probably used for obituaries and foreclosures, and Nora Vance picked it up and read it and looked at her husband and said, "I didn't know he owned land." "Apparently he did," Davis said. 112 acres, Ferris said. "Farmhouse, outbuildings, and appurtenances thereto. Patrick County. Your great-uncle filed the deed in 1959, but the land records suggest continuous family ownership going back considerably further. There's a small mineral rights question we'd need to sort before any sale, but the property itself transfers cleanly." Nora looked at the deed. Ferris looked at his watch. Davis looked out the window at the parking lot in Stewart, which was not a view that rewarded looking. "What's the condition of the house?" Davis asked. Ferris paused in a way that answered the question before he spoke. "Habitable," he said, which was lawyer for barely. They drove out to see it that same afternoon because the drive from Roanoke was 3 hours, and they'd already made it once, and Davis was not a man who liked making the same trip twice. Route 58 west out of Stewart into the Blue Ridge foothills, then off the state road onto a county road, then off the county road onto a gravel track that Nora's phone lost interest in about halfway down. Davis drove by the directions Ferris had written on a notepad, the old way, landmark to landmark, and they found the property as the afternoon light was going orange and long across the hillsides. The gate was the first thing they saw. It stood at the head of the gravel lane where it left the road, a simple two-post farm gate of welded steel pipe, the kind that latched with a chain and swung wide enough for a tractor. Ordinary in every respect, except for the fence posts on either side of it, and the fence posts running away from it in both directions along the road edge as far as they could see before the lane curved out of sight. Every post was topped with a skull. Not the same skull. Different animals, different sizes. Cow skulls, broad and heavy, their eye sockets squared by age. Deer skulls, with and without antlers, the bone gone from white to ivory to gray, depending on how long they'd been up there. Smaller skulls that Nora couldn't immediately identify. Hogs, maybe, or something she didn't know. All of them positioned the same way, facing out from the property, looking toward the road, toward whatever came down the lane from outside. Davis stopped the truck, and they sat looking at the fence line for a moment. "Well," Davis said. "Yes," Nora said. They drove through the gate and up the lane. The farmhouse was in the condition Ferris's pause had suggested, a two-story frame structure that had been built solid and maintained sporadically and left alone for the last 15 years since her great-uncle had gone into the nursing home in Floyd. The porch sagged on the left side where a support post had rotted at the base. The windows were intact, which was something. Inside, the smell of a closed house, mouse evidence in the kitchen, wallpaper coming away from the plaster in the back bedroom in long strips like shed skin. But the floors were sound, and the roof, as far as Davis could tell from standing in the upstairs rooms looking for water stains, had not been leaking badly. "It needs work," Davis said. "Everything needs work," Nora said, which was a thing she said often and which Davis had learned was not pessimism but assessment. She walked from room to room with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the structure rather than the surfaces, the way a person looks at a house when they're deciding whether to love it. Davis stood at the kitchen window and looked at the fence line running along the back of the property. From here he could see 8 or 9 posts, each one topped with its skull, the bone pale against the dark of the tree line behind them. The skulls on the back fence faced inward, toward the house. He noticed this and filed it and did not say anything about it yet. "The land is worth something," Nora said from the hallway. "The mineral rights question? Forget the minerals, the timber alone. And it's good farmland, the bottom ground along the creek." She appeared in the kitchen doorway. "We've been talking about getting out of Roanoke for 2 years. We've been talking about a lot of things for 2 years. She looked at him with the particular look that meant she was deciding whether to push. "I want to stay tonight," she said. "I want to see what it feels like in the morning." Davis looked at the skulls on the fence posts. "I'll get the sleeping bags from the truck," he said. The neighbor came the next morning. They heard the truck on the gravel lane before they saw it, a sound that carries remarkably far in the Patrick County hills, where the hollows act as amplifiers for any mechanical noise. Davis was on the porch with coffee when the truck appeared, an old Ford the color of dried mud, and the man who climbed out of it was built like a fence post himself, lean and weathered, somewhere between 60 and 80 in the way that men who've worked outdoors their whole lives blur the decades. His name was Cecil Akers. He owned the adjoining property to the north, had for 40 years, had known Nora's great-uncle Harlan since before that. He shook Davis's hand with the grip of a man who'd been shaking hands as a form of sizing up his whole life. "Heard somebody was out here," Cecil said. "Thought I'd come introduce." Davis offered coffee. Cecil declined in the way that mountain people decline hospitality they intend to accept, once so as not to seem eager. Davis poured him a cup anyway, and they stood on the porch in the October cold and talked about the property, the road condition, the creek that ran the south boundary and flooded every few years. Then Cecil set down his cup and looked at the fence line. "You're not going to take 'em down," he said. It was not a question. Davis looked at him. "The skulls." "Yes." "We hadn't decided." Cecil was quiet for a moment, looking at the fence posts. "Harlan put those up in 1962. Some of them go back further. I don't know how far. My father said they were there when he was young, and that they'd been there when his father was young." He picked up his coffee cup again. "There's a reason they're there." "What reason?" Nora said from the doorway. Cecil looked at her, then back at the fence line. "Harlan Vance was not a stupid man and not a frightened man, and that he kept that fence exactly as it was for 60 years and wouldn't let anyone touch it." He picked up his cup. "I believe that counts for something." He left 20 minutes later. They watched his truck go down the gravel lane between the rows of skulls. "He's serious," Nora said. "I know." "So we don't touch the fence." Davis looked at her. "You still want to keep it?" "I want to understand it," she said, which was not the same thing and also was. They went back to Roanoke and spent 3 weeks making the decision that they'd already made in the first 20 minutes on the porch. Davis gave notice on his lease, and Nora negotiated remote work arrangements with the firm, and they hired a contractor out of Stewart to address the most urgent structural issues: the porch post, the back bedroom plaster, the kitchen plumbing that had been winterized but not well. They moved in on the first weekend of November, which was late in the year for a move, but neither of them was willing to wait until spring. The first month was the work of settling, the physical and domestic labor of making a neglected house into a home, which left little room for anything else. Davis rebuilt the porch support, and Nora stripped the back bedroom wallpaper, and they ate dinner late every night and fell asleep early the way people do when they're doing real physical work for the first time in years. It felt, in those first weeks, like exactly what they'd needed: the space, the quiet, the sense of a project with a shape to it. They did not touch the fence. Nora photographed it systematically on a dry afternoon in November, every post, every skull, working her way around the property's perimeter. She printed the photographs and pinned them to a corkboard in the room she was using as a home office, and she looked at them while she worked. She was trying to understand the system, what animal, which direction it faced, whether there was a pattern in the placement. The front fence along the road all faced outward. The back fence along the tree line all faced inward. The side fences, running north and south, the skulls alternated direction, one facing in, one facing out, one facing in a regular pattern that she counted twice to be sure of. She noted it. She didn't know what it meant. She kept looking. The first thing that went wrong happened in December, and it was small enough that Davis almost didn't mention it. He'd been clearing brush along the south fence line, the one that ran along the creek, working his way along the fence with loppers and a handsaw, cutting back the sumac and wild rose that had grown up around the posts over 15 years of neglect. He'd gotten 3/4 of the way down the fence when he noticed that one of the posts was leaning, not fallen, but leaning outward at about 15 degrees, pushed by the root growth of a large sumac that had established itself against the base. He cleared the sumac, he straightened the post, he tamped the base back in with a fence post driver he'd found in the barn. He did not think about which direction the skull on that post had been facing before he straightened it, because he didn't know, because he hadn't been paying attention. That night, something was in the barn. He heard it at 2 in the morning. Not a crash, not an obvious disturbance, but a sustained low sound that he couldn't immediately categorize. He lay in the dark listening to it for a full minute before he decided it was not a sound the barn made on its own. He got up, got his flashlight and his boots, and went across the yard. The barn was empty. His tools were undisturbed. The old equipment in the back, a hay rake, a disc harrow, the skeletal remains of a tractor that had not moved since the 1970s, all where it had been. Nothing in the stalls. Nothing in the loft that his light could reach. But in the soft dirt of the barn floor, near the center of the main bay, there were tracks. Not clear tracks. The floor was dry and hard except in one low area near the drain where moisture collected, and it was only in that soft patch that the impressions were legible. But legible they were. Something had walked through that patch on 2 feet. Not small feet. The impression of each was larger than his own boot print by several inches, and the stride length measured between impressions was longer than any stride he could produce himself. He stood in the barn in the 2 in the morning dark and looked at the tracks, and then he went back inside and lay in bed and did not sleep again until the sky went gray. In the morning, he told Nora. She came to the barn and crouched over the soft patch and looked at the impressions for a long time without speaking. "The post," she said. "What?" She looked up at him. "The post you moved yesterday. Did you check which way the skull was facing before you straightened it?" He had not. They went to the south fence together and walked its length, and Nora matched each post to her photographs. It took 20 minutes. Near the creek where he'd been working, they found it, a post whose skull now faced in the opposite direction from its position in Nora's photographs. He had straightened the post without checking its orientation, and the skull, which had faced outward toward the creek, now faced inward toward the house. They stood looking at it in the gray December light. "I'll fix it," Davis said. "Wait." Nora put her hand on his arm. "Wait. Let me think about this." "Nora, something was in the barn last night. We moved the skull back today, and if nothing happens tonight, then we know that was it. If we just move it back without understanding why it matters which direction it faces, we're fumbling. We need to understand the system." Davis looked at the skull on the post. A deer skull, old, the bone the color of old soap. It stared at the house with its empty sockets. "How long do you need to think?" he asked. "1 day," she said. "Don't touch anything. 1 day." That night was worse. Not the barn this time, the house itself. They were in bed when it started, a sound from the downstairs that Davis first took for the settling sounds old houses make in the cold, and then, as he came more fully awake, understood was not that. Footsteps would be the easy word for it, but it was not quite footsteps, more like the sound a very large and very careful thing makes when it is trying to move quietly and is not entirely sure how. It moved through the downstairs for 20 minutes. Davis lay rigid in the bed with his hand on Nora's arm and Nora's hand on his, and neither of them spoke. It did not come upstairs. It did not break anything or open doors. It simply moved, carefully and thoroughly through every room on the ground floor, and then it stopped, and then it was gone, and neither of them could say exactly when gone had happened. In the morning, they went downstairs together. The rooms were undisturbed, no tracks in the floor, no marks on the walls. The kitchen, the living room, the back hallway, the small room off the kitchen that had been a mud room, all exactly as they'd left them the night before. Except in the mud room, on the wooden floor, there was a single impression in the dust. Not a full footprint, just the forward portion of one, the ball and toes, as if something had stepped in and then back out. The impression was not made by a shoe. The toes were long, longer than human toes, and spread wide the way the fingers of an open hand are spread. Nora photographed it. Then she went to the south fence and she turned the skull back to its original orientation, facing the creek, facing out, and she stood at the fence line and she said, quietly but clearly, "That was our mistake. We understand now." She told Davis later that she didn't know who she was talking to when she said it. She said it the way you say a thing when you need it to be heard and you're not sure by what, but you're sure by something. That night was quiet. The barn was empty. The downstairs was still. They slept badly out of residual adrenaline, but they slept, and in the morning, the house was exactly as they'd left it. It has been 2 years since the Vances moved to the Patrick County farmstead. They have done good work on the house. The porch is sound now, the kitchen replastered, the back bedroom finished in board and batten that Nora salvaged from the old barn siding. Davis has started putting in a kitchen garden along the south side of the house. Nora has expanded the office into 2 rooms and built a small dark room for the photography that has become, in the quiet of the mountains, something more than a hobby. They have not touched the fence. They have, in fact, become its stewards in a way that neither of them entirely anticipated. Davis checks the posts after every hard wind and every freeze-thaw cycle, resetting anything that has shifted, always careful to note the orientation of each skull before he touches the post and to restore it exactly. Nora has built on her photographic survey, documenting the fence through the seasons, studying the pattern of placement. She has a theory now about the alternating orientations on the side fences, something about boundary conditions, about the difference between what is being kept in and what is being kept out. But she holds the theory loosely, the way you hold a theory about something you respect enough not to be certain of. Cecil Akers comes for dinner occasionally. He drinks his coffee now without needing to decline it first. He has told them over several evenings and in the slow way that mountain people tell things they've been carrying for a long time, more of what he knew from Harlan and from his own father before him. The hollow at the upper end of the property, the thing his father described as old, the fact that the fence predated Nora's family's ownership by at least 2 generations, that whoever built it first did not leave records, that the knowledge of its terms had been passed down imperfectly and incompletely each time, and that what Harlan had known was already less than what Harlan's grandfather had known. "What they have," Davis said once, "is a contract they can only partially read." Cecil had nodded at that. He said, "But you're honoring it, which is the important part." He said, "The ones who came before you honored it too, mostly, until they didn't or couldn't anymore." He said, "The land knows the difference between somebody who's paying attention and somebody who isn't." Nora asked him once what was in the hollow at the upper end, what the fence was the agreement with. Cecil was quiet for a long time. He looked at his coffee cup. "I don't know exactly," he said. "Harlan didn't know exactly. I don't think his grandfather knew exactly." He looked up. "I think that might be part of the arrangement, that you keep the terms without knowing everything, that you maintain the thing without requiring it to explain itself." He paused. "Most agreements are like that if you think about it. You shake a hand and you keep your word, and you don't always know everything about what you've signed on to." Nora thought about that. What happens if we sell? If someone else comes in who doesn't know? Cecil looked at her with the patient eyes of a man who has thought about this for 40 years. "Pray they listen to their neighbor," he said. "They are not planning to sell." Nora said this to Davis on a night last spring, sitting on the repaired porch with the last of the day's light on the ridgeline to the west, the fence posts casting their long shadows across the yard and the skulls on them pale and watchful in the dusk. She said it not as a statement requiring agreement, but as a thing she was making true by saying it, the way you speak a decision into solidity. Davis said, "I know." They sat on the porch in the Patrick Jaunty evening, and the hollow at the upper end of the property was dark, and the fence held its line along the boundary, and the skulls faced their appointed directions, keeping their terms, maintaining the agreement that neither of them could fully read, but both of them understood well enough. The land, Cecil had said, knows the difference between somebody who's paying attention and somebody who isn't. They were paying attention. In the Patrick County Mountains, in the dark beyond the bone fence, whatever received that attention did not respond. It did not need to. It had been here long before them, and it would be here long after, and the fence had always been enough. Not a wall, not a cage. A conversation, conducted in bone and post and careful orientation between the people who lived on this land and the thing that had lived on it longer. The terms held. For now, the terms held.